Welcome in to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. This is a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition. I'm your host, Benjamin Wolk. I'm here with Jordan Hill. Got a great show in store for you, as always. We'll have some news items that we're going to talk about on the Classic City Collective front, the athletic department front. What does it mean for recruiting? You've maybe seen some of these news updates, but I think contextualizing it is really important to understand what does it mean within the mechanism of Georgia recruiting. We will talk about the Under Armour Atlanta camp from Carrollton a couple of weeks ago. There were definitely some major Georgia takeaways coming out of that. I will always encourage folks to subscribe to Dogs 24/7 on that front because there will be content behind our paywall that you will want to check out, that we won't necessarily get into all of the dirty details of it during this show, but we'll definitely hit on some of the bullet points. We have an interview with Georgia offensive line signee Dontrell Glover. He will enroll in May, and so we got a chance to talk with him up at his school. And then, as always, we'll get into some of the segments that we love: pick a commit, or predict a commit rather, arrow pointing up. We'll have a new one from the Junkyard, which I think has some potential as well. And then we'll take a little bit of a look ahead. Jordan, before we get into anything, how are we?
Doing good. It's been kind of a funny week, Ben. I want to shout out our mutual friend Justin Lee. Got married on Monday and had a chance to be there in Pike Road over in Alabama. But I feel like ever since then, like my whole week is off. It's like, you know, when there's a holiday on a Monday and you're just kind of left trying to figure out what day it is. But otherwise, doing good and excited for another edition of the Stay Wolk show.
Yeah, well, and there was no basketball game during the week this week, which just throws off the whole circadian rhythm or whatever. I don't know. I just tried to sound way smarter than I actually am. But let's dive into some of the news items from the week, because there were some updates that came along on the Classic City Collective front within the Georgia athletic department. And quite frankly, they're the type of news items that I think a lot of people probably see, and then they just move along with their day. They say these types of things don't matter a whole lot. And look, if you're just headline reading, you're probably right. Like you don't, until you know what it actually means from a Georgia recruiting standpoint, it might not mean a whole lot to you. So I want to get into some of those news items and what does it mean for Georgia recruiting. And so I'm going to start with the Classic City Collective. And I don't want to feel like I'm talking down to anybody, but just to make sure that everybody knows exactly what all of these entities are. The Classic City Collective is Georgia's NIL arm that is separate from the university. As most people listening to this know, I'm sure, that collective is really responsible for coordinating the agreements between Georgia and player representatives, or with the players themselves or player families or whoever it is that is representing those players. And so the collective has been in place for several years now. And, you know, we can get into a whole nother discussion about where Georgia falls in the ranks of collectives, how well they're funded comparatively, those types of things. But the Classic City Collective has been a very well-run operation since it was founded. And the person that was involved as the CEO of the Classic City Collective from the moment that it was founded was a guy named Matt Hibbs. And plain and simple, Matt Hibbs really was the guy negotiating these NIL deals between the Classic City Collective and Georgia's football players. And he really was that main negotiator involved in all of those conversations. Matt Hibbs has been the CEO of the Classic City Collective since it was launched. He left, and this was actually not technically news when I reported. This part of it was not brand news when I reported it. He has moved over from the Classic City Collective to Pathway Sports, which Pathway Sports is a video game rights. Well, I think they're going to get involved in more than just video game rights, but that is where their focus has been right now, because they have been the liaison between EA Sports video game video rights and all of the football players across college football. They're trying to sign all of these various college football programs rosters to these video game rights deals. And so Matt Hibbs, who has been on the front end of really everything that's happened in the NIL space. I mean, he was the head of Barstool Athletes when they launched their NIL wing at Barstool Sports. He then came over and led the Classic City Collective at arguably, the program that is at the forefront of the sport. And now he's moving over to Pathway Sports, which I think is going to be a name when we're talking about NIL related things. And we're talking about deals between, that have to do with player rights and anything like that. I think Pathway Sports is going to be cutting edge when it comes to that type of thing. And so Matt Hibbs always just seems to be ahead of the game when it comes to what is the hot new thing in the NIL space. So he is moving over to Pathway Sports. And so what does that mean for Georgia? Well, that means they needed to find a replacement to be able to be the person that negotiates these deals with players and their representatives. And so, Matt Hibbs was the guy. There has been this guy that has been in Georgia's athletic department for a couple of years now, working on the NIL side in a slightly different capacity, named Tanner Potts. As is the case with just about anybody that's going to be going into one of these roles. He has a legal background. He went to University of Georgia Law School. And for the past several years, he has been working in an NIL related role within the athletic department, which again, this is all new. It's all very confusing to a lot of people. So I'm going to do my best to lay this out the way in terms of what each person's responsibilities were and what they're going to be and how this is going to change moving forward. But Tanner Potts' main focus was around creating these contracts and these marketing deals for non-football players, so basketball players, baseball players, softball players they had real, Zaxby's deals, or they had real Grubhub deals, or they had real name a local business that a Georgia football player or a basketball player or gymnast or whatever that might be might have been involved with. Tanner Potts was integral in the creation of the legal documents related to all of that. And so this is a guy that has a lot of familiarity with the NIL space. He's somebody that's already been working on Georgia's behalf as it relates to the NIL space. So he was a natural fit to be the replacement for Matt Hibbs as the CEO at the collective. Now, an important distinguishing part of all of this is, as of right now, the collective and Georgia's athletic department have to be completely separate from one another. These are as the rules state right now, and it's a ridiculous thing to say in some respects because we know how closely every single football program in America is working with their collective, but for legal purposes, they have to be completely separate. And so Tanner Potts went from being a employee in Georgia's athletic department to now being the CEO of the Classic City Collective. So he is no longer part of Georgia's athletic department. Come July 1st, the House settlement will go, or we're expecting the House settlement to go into effect. And so that is going to have a change as it relates to revenue share from the NCAA, how teams are allowed to put these agreements into place, who these contracts can be coming up from specifically. In some cases, these collectives might move in-house with the athletic department. Again, a lot of that still remains to be seen. And so in terms of what the working function actually looks like come July 1st. But between now and July 1st, the Classic City Collective has to operate entirely separately from the athletic department. And so Tanner Potts will be the person in charge of negotiating any of those deals. Now, this is important because that goes into effect July 1st. Georgia's going to be hosting guys on official visits all throughout June. They're going to be having big-time prospects, likely at the quarterback position, on campus throughout the spring as well. And so a lot of these conversations are going to be needing to happen before July 1st comes. And so that's why Tanner Potts is going to be integral in replacing Matt Hibbs in that role. Nothing changes as it relates to current agreements with the Classic City Collective. I actually had some people that have agreements in place with Classic City Collective reach out when they saw the news that I had reported about the change, just because this is all new to a lot of people. And there were some folks that were concerned, like, did this change anything for me with Matt Hibbs leaving because he was the main person negotiating these contracts with these player representatives? The answer to that is no. That will all just be handled by Tanner Potts moving forward. And so I wanted to start there just because the collective is a foreign concept to a lot of folks. They don't know how this operates, but the leadership at the collective level is wildly, wildly important to how Georgia is going to be successful on the field. Jordan, I'm sure that I did a terrible job of clarifying some of that. Is there any points of clarification that you would make or any questions that you would have that you feel like I should answer there?
No, I think you did a good job of laying it out. And we talked about it very briefly on Tuesday's podcast. But to me, it's just very clear that Georgia's getting its ducks in a row for what it expects. And I will say you made a really good point. One I was going to emphasize had you not done it. The House settlement is not for sure going to happen. It's the expectation, but there's been challenges ever since it was first announced. But no, I think you did a good job of explaining the changes. And, it's one of those things, like you said, I think you've given the example of people reaching out to you and saying, well, what does this mean for my deal or whatever? There's a lot of questions right now. There's a lot of things that are unclear. And it's something where we may not have the answer and we'll try to go track it down, but there's a lot of people trying to understand what it means and what it means going forward.
Well, as I've said before, just know, Georgia runs a very great business. The Georgia football program is probably one of the most well-run businesses out there right now. I know that the Classic City Collective is a separate entity from the Georgia football program, but I consider it an extension of the Georgia football program. And as a result, you're always going to have great leadership in place. You're always going to have, the right operation moving forward as it comes to Georgia football, Georgia recruiting, whatever that might be. But you mentioned some of this stuff is still up in the air, and that brings me to some other parts of that news as well. So it was not just what does this mean for the Classic City Collective, because like I mentioned, Tanner Potts, who is now the CEO of the Classic City Collective, had roles within the Georgia athletic department that were important for what Georgia does for NIL creation now, but also what it's going to mean in the future and come July 1st. And so a piece that was maybe buried in that news article a little bit that I wrote that I think is as important, arguably more important, is a move within the athletic department. And so there's a guy within the University of Georgia athletic department named Stephen Drummond. He was, I think, previously a chief communications officer, I think was technically his title. But just to give you some background on Stephen Drummond, this is a guy that he worked for the Jaguars, he worked for the Panthers. He has a lot of connections in the football space as well as the corporate business world. I think that what I'm about to talk to makes him a perfect fit for what Georgia is going to be trying to accomplish on the other side of the NIL game. So Stephen Drummond was given some new titles. I don't know if you would consider them a promotion or not, but it's definitely, he is being thrust into a much, much more important role as it relates to Georgia recruiting and roster acquisition. But he is now officially Deputy Athletic Director and Chief Marketing Officer. And so what does that mean for him as it relates to Georgia recruiting? Because I know that he's going to do a lot more than just as it relates to Georgia recruiting. But because of the show that we do, because of the world that we live in, I want to put some context into what does that mean for Georgia recruiting? And so Jordan mentioned this, one thing about all of this is there is some unknown, some gray area in terms of what is this going to look like 6 months from now, because once that House settlement goes into effect, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of creative new ideas that programs nationally are utilizing that Georgia is going to latch on to that they maybe haven't thought of themselves yet. And the other programs are going to do the same thing with Georgia and the way that Georgia is operating. So there will be more opportunity for me to clarify some of this moving forward. But starting July 1, I think the best way to explain what Stephen Drummond is going to do will be to explain the House settlement a little bit further and what it means financially and how these teams are trying to put these rosters together. So starting July 1, assuming the House settlement goes into effect, and we're just going to, for the purposes of this conversation, we're just going to assume that it is going to go into effect as is. I'm not smart enough to understand the political side of it and whether it is absolutely going to go into effect or whether there will need to be tweaks to be made or what will be contested here or there. again, we're going to just operate as if what we know today, it will go into effect. And so should it go into effect July 1, what that means is from a revenue share, and you've probably heard that buzzword a lot, revenue share. What that means is all of these institutions that are within the NCAA, within certain conferences, are going to receive a certain percentage of money of the NCAA's revenue dollars. And so what that means is all of these programs in the SEC, big time, power football programs, are expecting to receive about 21, I think it's a little bit shy of $21 million, but about $21 million that they will be able to utilize for their athletic department to have contracts where they are paying these players directly. My understanding of it as we sit right now, and this is subject to change, I'm sure, is that about 14 to 15 million of that is going to be allotted for the football program. Now, that's great. Like, I know what people are sitting here saying, like, okay, now the universities are going to be able to, pay these guys directly. It should take away some of the wild, wild west aspect of things that has been going on as it relates to the collectives and the booster funded money that is sort of primarily run this sport for a long, long time. And that is certainly the case. Like, that 14 to 15 million dollars will make it a little bit more cut and dry in terms of how you are paying these players. Now, the one problem with that is, and I think we've seen this with Ohio State's, the reporting around Ohio State's roster this past year, a lot of other really competitive football rosters around the country, is most college football programs believe $20 to $25 million is about the window that you need to be in to win football at the level that these college football programs want to be able to win. A lot of people might just be appalled to hear that number. They might say, oh my gosh, that's crazy. If you understand the money that these universities are making, that these conferences are making, that the NCAA is making, that these TV networks are making, like, it really is not that shocking that the best football rosters in America are going to be making, $20 to $25 million of that. But knowing that Georgia will have $14 to $15 million allotted for football to get to where Georgia feels like it needs to get to have a championship roster, that's about, 6 to 10 million additional extra money that Georgia is going to need to find from somewhere. And the way that I termed it in my article and the way that I've been hearing it termed just when I've been having conversations with sources around this, they're thinking of this money as over the cap money. And so you've got that $14 million, $15 million, and we'll think of that as a salary cap. Just, I know it's maybe taboo to refer to it as salary cap just because of the way that it's been operated in college football for a while, but that's the way that all these teams are thinking about this. And so with the salary cap being approximately 14, 15 million, again, subject to change and just based on my understanding of how I'm expecting Georgia to operate, Georgia's going to have to find an additional $7 million, $8 million from somewhere. How do you do that? Well, that's where Stephen Drummond comes into play. And I think that that's where his background in the NFL world, in the corporate business world, just becomes so important for Georgia as they embark on this part of it. So anything that is considered over the cap dollars, I got a DM with the second I reported on this. I got a DM on Dogs 24/7 that said, what does that mean? Where is this coming from? Who's going to be responsible for that money? And it was a great question. And it was a question that I actually wanted to seek clarification from some people on before I answered it, because quite frankly, a lot of this is just as new to me as it is to you. And what I learned on that is what Stephen Drummond's going to be responsible for, and I'm sure that there will be a team and network of people that will be responsible for this as well. Georgia will be able to, through this new world, be able to broker their own marketing deals between brands and players. So I think of these as real name, image, and likeness deals, right? Like, this is not pay for play. This is not revenue share, getting, whatever, like anything that you've heard about how money has changed hands through the last couple of years via NIL. The natural intention of NIL was people that are marketable signing agreements based on their name, image, and likeness with brands, companies, whatever that may be, to market themselves and that company and make money off of that. That was the natural intention of that. Stephen Drummond's side of the business will be exactly that. The goal will be doing it with bigger mega brands. And I mentioned some of them when I was on, on Dogs 24/7, but Delta, Coca-Cola, Raising Cane's, Zaxby's, a lot of the brands that you've likely seen some Georgia players represent in the past. Roback is one that I know Malachi Starks was partnered with. Like some of these bigger national brands that have shown that they have interest in participating in the NIL space, and they have participated or interest in actually having real marketing deals with these guys. That's where Georgia is going to try and get this 7 to 8 million additional above the cap money that they're trying to get. And I keep using air quotes for anybody that's not watching on YouTube whenever I say above the cap, just because I even feel a little bit slimy when I'm talking about salary cap, just because it is a weird world, not just because it's different than it used to be, but also it's different right now than it's going to be in 6 months. And so the way that you're able to talk about these things and the way that the university is going to be able to directly involve themselves with these things is going to be different come July 1 when that house settlement goes into effect. But essentially, Stephen Drummond will be responsible for helping broker these marketing deals. It's not so much fundraising as it is generating these real business deals between players and their representatives, as well as these big brands. And as you know, Jordan, like it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Like not most 18 to 19-year-old college football players that are coming in don't have the name value, the brand value to be worth to these brands what they are worth to the football programs. And I think that's been the biggest crux in many of the NIL related debates is a lot of people that live in the old school world of like these players are making too much money or asking too much money or whatever that might be. They're a little bit, dumbfounded because they're saying these guys don't have that like natural marketing value. That said, their dollar value to the foot, like having a left tackle that is going to be a future NFL left tackle, the dollar value that you bring to your football program probably exceeds the amount of money that you're making. If we're just being real about things, quarterbacks that hit like Cam Ward was underpaid this last year, even though he was one of the higher paid football players in college football. I promise you, Miami feels like, even though they didn't make the playoff, the amount of interest in marketing and future recruiting that they got because Cam Ward went to Miami last year, he will ultimately, when you look at it, the bottom line, he was underpaid by Miami. And I think that's the issue. It's like, it's hard for Zaxby's to look at a left tackle that nobody knows and say, hey, we're going to pay you, or, we're going to have a deal with you for $300,000. Like that's hard to do. It's not as hard for a football program to say that because they know that they need that left tackle to survive. And so I do think that Stephen Drummond, it seemed like a more minor part of the article, but I think that in the future, it's going to be perhaps a more major part of the article because that part of offsetting the cap dollars will be the difference between you just having a good football team and you having a championship caliber football team.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did a great job explaining it. And another point you made, this is a whole new world. This is still, even when you consider NIL, we're still pretty new into that, era of college athletics. And just knowing Stephen Drummond as much as I do, him being around, I think that's a great move. I really like Stephen, the times I've had to deal with him and getting to know him since he came on board at Georgia. And I mean, it's one of those things where they're going to stick up for the athletes and make sure that they're paid, in these NIL opportunities, what they're worth. And, this is a great time if you are one of these potential sponsors. We're still talking about a Georgia program seen as one of the top in college football, one that, by the time we are talking about 2025, really in depth, I mean, especially in the summer, they're going to be a popular pick to make a playoff run. They'll probably be a team that a lot of people pick to win the championship. So it's a good time to be in the NIL space as far as Georgia goes. And I think Stephen Drummond's going to do a great job in this new role.
No doubt. And he was a guy, I will say, he was up for a couple of athletic director jobs across the country this past year as well. So important to retain that type of talent within the athletic department, no question. And speaking of retaining talent within the athletic department as well, I would be remiss, we talked a lot on the NIL side, the collective side. All of this works together with Georgia's personnel department. And so the personnel department is the one that is going to be responsible for finding the right players, identifying who Georgia wants, helping set up travel and organizing camps and those types of things so that Georgia can do the best job of actually recognizing which talent it is that they want to coordinate these NIL agreements with. So I will note there was no title changes here, but Georgia did retain Mark Robinson, who is the chief of staff, and the director of player personnel, Will Myers. Those two work very closely with Kirby Smart as it relates to things like salary cap, roster management, figuring out the right types of players. I know that everyone gets all caught up. There's a lot of college football programs that have general managers right now. And I get questions every week, like, when is Georgia getting a general manager? When is Georgia doing that? And it's like, I think people get a little bit too caught up in the title game sometimes. Like, titles are not nearly as important as job responsibilities. And so everyone wants Georgia to just name a general manager. It's almost like when people used to complain about Georgia not having a special teams coordinator. And it's like, well, you've got all these different people that are helping work on special teams. It's like, you don't necessarily need an on-field special teams coordinator to be able to have a good special teams unit and to be able to coach that up. You don't have to have someone that is a general manager by title to have people that do general manager type of things. I think together, Mark Robinson and Will Myers both kind of serve certain general manager type of roles. And one thing that I wanted to bring up as well is there was one title change within the personnel department. James Ellis, who's been the assistant director of player personnel by title since last year, probably in actuality since about 2020, just in terms of the role that he's served within this personnel department. He's in charge of a lot of those things I just mentioned, the day-to-day, figuring out, watching a lot of tape, figuring out which players Georgia actually wants, whenever coaches are on the road during January, figuring out who's going to go see which players and when they're trying to get players on campus for summer camps. Like, James Ellis he had his hands on everything that happened with that. He has now been promoted to the director of scouting. From a job responsibility standpoint, I don't think a whole lot is going to change from a day-to-day. I think that he will probably get a little bit more control over and, say so in certain scouting decisions, certain personnel types of decisions. But I've said this for a while, like, James Ellis really, in my mind, Will Myers, Mark Robinson, I think of them as general managers, and I think of James Ellis as the director of player personnel. The titles look a little bit different than that. But in terms of what Georgia is asking these guys to do, I think that they have as much responsibility or more responsibility than just about any GM in the country. Now, Kirby Smart's always going to have final say when it comes to roster decisions. That's going to be something that's very important to him. That's why Georgia's always going to be great, because they do have a head coach with the pulse on it as much as he has it. But these these little things sometimes seem like unimportant, trivial moves, whatever. But they're not. These are the Stephen Drummonds of the world, the James Ellises of the world, the Will Myers, Mark Robinsons, the Tanner Potts of the world, or Matt Hibbs previously. These are the people behind the scenes when everyone spends their time complaining about Mike Bobo and complaining about Stacey Searles. These are the people that are responsible for putting the elite rosters that Georgia has year in and year out in place. And so I just think that, sometimes too much gets spent on on-field position coaches or a wide receiver that dropped a few too many passes, when it's like, in the grand scheme of things, everything's going to be A-okay because Georgia recruits at a high level, and this is why, because they have a great operation in place.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a team behind the scenes, and, even folks you don't see on a particular game day, and folks like James Ellis and the other folks we've talked about in the first part of this podcast. I mean, they're huge in the way this program is run and how the program will be run going forward and the talent they continue to bring into it. So, yeah, I think it's worthwhile to highlight those folks and talk about what they've got and the new job titles. As you said, a lot of the responsibilities a lot more important than what it might say on their business card.
Yep, no doubt about that. All right, great. I probably took a little bit longer than I wanted to explain all of those various changes, but I do think it is critically important to the future of Georgia football. And these are the names and faces behind the scenes that probably don't get as much love and respect for the role that they're playing in all of these various successes. I want to pivot to talking about the Under Armour Atlanta camp in Carrollton, Georgia. So this camp was the date on it, I guess it was Super Bowl Sunday. Now that I think about it, it was the morning of Super Bowl Sunday. So if you're subscribed to Dogs 24/7, I will use this as an opportunity to shameless plug the website. There's been a lot of this content covered already. In fact, more than what we're going to get into during this podcast will be available at Dogs 24/7 in the past, but definitely go check all of that out. Should you find any interest in this, I will also say I'll be at a 7-on-7 this weekend. The dead period's about to end, so high school football stuff, 7-on-7 stuff, that's about to get kicked off starting in March as well. So there's going to be a lot of content moving forward over the next several months as well. So I do always encourage you to go check out Dogs 24/7 for this type of thing. But I wanted to call out some of the main things that stood out to me in my conversations from that Under Armour Atlanta camp. And I'm going to get more into the recruiting intel side of things here than I am the player evaluations or what I saw specifically from the camp. I've gotten into a lot of that already, but I wanted to start with two guys. They were the only two guys that I can think of right now, or that were at the camp at least, that have talked about Georgia in a way where I would probably consider Georgia their public leader. And that is running back Jay Lamar, who we talked a little bit about last episode during the Predict a Commit segment. And then safety Tyreek Green from Buford High School. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because these players are coached well nowadays when it comes to talking to the media, when it comes to knowing that they are negotiating. I mean, this is different than it used to be. It's not just like, oh, I want to figure out where I want to go to school. It's like, I want to figure out where I want to go to school, but I am also having to work in many cases with an agent or a player representative, and I am negotiating with a collective or a university or whatever that looks like. And so you don't want to tip your hand too much. It's the same as any free agent negotiation that's going on in the NFL or the NBA, where it's like, I don't want everyone to know that I want to play for the Lakers, because then the Lakers are going to try and get me at a discount. And so you don't see a whole lot of, this is my leader, this is my number one school anymore. But when you do, I definitely, my sensors go off. You know, my tea leaf sensors go off, because it's like, all right, you're almost willing to disregard some of the negotiation and some of the game that you have to play on the recruiting side of things to just acknowledge the truth of the matter. And I think that Jay Lamar and Tyreek Green both did this in my conversations with them. I mean, Jay Lamar definitely has referred to Georgia as his leader. I want to remember the quote that he gave to Anna Adams, our national reporter, about it. Oh man, when next time I've got you going about something, I'm going to look that quote up, because I think it was a good one. But Jay Lamar said something to the effect of, yeah, like, if there's a leader, like, Georgia's my leader. Tyreek Green said something to the effect of, like, Georgia has separated themselves from the rest of the pack as it relates to all these schools that are recruiting him. And so, you know, I'm not saying that Georgia's going to get these guys for sure. But I think that Georgia is the team to beat for both of them. And Jordan is always best speaking of guys working behind the scenes. Jordan, I bring up Anna Adams' article with Jay Lamar. I get a text message on the spot from Jordan. There's nobody better in the business, but his exact phrasing was, Georgia's his favorite school because it's in his bones. And for starters, the way South Georgia guys or Middle Georgia guys just talk about football, I just love it. Just saying that Georgia football is in his bones. You know, again, there's a reason he was my predict to commit last episode. Let's just put it that way. He's someone that I think there's a lot of mutual respect for between Georgia and Jay Lamar. I wanted to bring up someone that I would not predict to Georgia right now, but someone that I think there's a lot of relevant recruiting side of things going on right now, and that's Jordan Edmonds, cornerback from Sprayberry High School. I personally felt that he was the top performer of any position group, any player at this camp. I mean, he really dominated the one-on-one sessions, which quite frankly, at these camps, it's really hard for cornerbacks to dominate because wide receivers they're in these one-on-ones, they're able to run any route they want. Oftentimes they're ridiculous routes that are never going to be able to be run in an 11-on-11 setting. And so it just puts cornerbacks in a situation where they can get exposed a little bit, even if they're not really getting exposed. I think Jordan Edmonds won just about every rep that I saw. Very rarely are you seeing corners jump routes in these one-on-one sessions the way that Jordan Edmonds was doing time and time and time again. So I think there's a reason why teams want him as badly as they do. He was actually scheduled. We're recording this the morning of February 20th. He was actually scheduled to commit on February 19th. So yesterday, as we're recording this. And he ended up postponing that. I'm told it was because of some construction situation that was going on at his school. But anytime there is a commitment date change, it always makes me wonder a little bit. Had he committed yesterday, I would have been expecting Alabama to be the choice. He like Jay Lamar, like Tyreek Green, have been calling Georgia he's been calling Alabama his leader's number one school. He hasn't been mincing words. That's been when he's been talking about that. That's been consistent when he's been talking to me. That's been consistent when he's been talking to Brett Greenberg, our Alabama reporter. That's been consistent when he's been talking to our Alabama reporters, Anna Adams, when he's been talking to Tom Lloyd. Like, he has been very consistent in that. And so I do believe that Alabama is the leader. That said, he's someone that I know Georgia really wants. I know that Georgia sent coaches to go see him play basketball on multiple occasions, or when they were able to, at least. And so that has been postponed, and it's something that I'm keeping an eye on, just because I think where Jordan Edmonds commits will be very interesting. Whether it is Georgia or not, it's going to be someone that Georgia is going to have to deal with in the future. A couple of guys who will take I'm going to name 3 guys that will take official visits to Georgia. Defensive lineman Tyson Bacon. He's currently committed to Tennessee. I find this one fascinating because I did not know much about Tyson Bacon. He had a really good day at the camp. He has a great name. Speaking of NIL, Tyson Foods, dude, just do your job. I don't know who in the marketing department is responsible for NIL related agreements at Tyson Foods. I actually have to imagine they probably haven't put much dedication into the NIL space at Tyson Foods. This is your guy, Tyson Bacon. There's no better option for you to break into the NIL space if you're Tyson Foods. He has a great relationship with Trey Scott. He camped at Georgia, I want to say 2022, so almost 3 years ago now. And Trey Scott has taken a very measured approach with the evaluation and development process with Tyson Bacon. He picked up an offer in January. He will take an official visit May 16th to May 18th, which will be Georgia's scavenger hunt weekend for those that are looking ahead that far. Just a name to tuck away. We're still trying to get clarity on the defensive line this cycle, and he's someone that really interests me because more than just his name, I think that he's a player that Georgia is going to pursue pretty heavily. And then 2 other guys that we've talked about in the past over recent episodes, Ryan Mosley, wide receiver / DB from Carrollton. We've talked about him in the context of being a wide receiver. As I wrote a couple of weeks ago after this camp, Georgia is giving him the option of receiver or defensive back. When he was on his junior day, he spent time with James Coley. He spent time with Travaris Robinson. He's the only person that I know of that during those junior days, when they break you into offensive meeting rooms and defensive meeting rooms, met with both the offensive coaches and the defensive coaches during that session. Interesting. We'll see how that plays out, because I have thought of him as someone that could very likely end up in this wide receiver class. Should that pivot to recruiting as a defensive back, he's definitely someone that I could see ending up in the defensive back class. But I think Georgia would like him to make a choice on which preference he would like to play, one side for these versus the other. There is the opportunity for it to be a two-way type of thing, but I don't think it's there yet. And then the MVP from the camp, it was an offensive lineman named Jared Smith, who I have mentioned previously, got to sit with Kirby Smart during the Georgia-Auburn basketball game. Probably could play offensive tackle, but I think would likely project as a guard to start out. And he will take an official visit to Georgia June 20th to 22nd, but also something to just file away. I have been told Georgia would really like to get him on an official visit for that first weekend, the first weekend of May 30th to June 1st. I don't know what the reasoning is for why Georgia is pushing for that date change. But a couple of things. If Georgia convinces him to change that date, one, that should tell you how strongly he feels about Georgia, that he's willing to change around his calendar for Georgia. And two, it should probably mean that Georgia has a reason for why they want it to be earlier in the period versus later in the period. I'll try and get answers on what the reasonings for that is.
No, I think that another successful camp, and it's one of those things like with that Jared Smith example, especially, you just pay attention to those visit dates. I feel like I'm not one that's quite in the weeds, especially compared to someone like you, Ben, but I've learned pay attention to the visit dates and who's showing up on campus when. Usually you can kind of get a read of where things stand with specific recruits.
For sure. All right. We've got a great interview, as always. We'll never I don't want to say never, because never is a long time and situations come up, but I will do my best to always have an interview for you when we're doing these shows where you're talking to somebody in the Georgia space, a recruit, a signee, a coach. We'll see. The options are limitless, I think, in terms of the type of people that we can have on for interviews. But Georgia has a couple of guys that did not enroll in January, and Dontrell Glover, offensive line signee from Langston Hughes, is one of them. So I wanted to get him on the show just to sort of catch up on what got him to Georgia. He had an interesting story because he was committed to Alabama and decommits because of Nick Saban's retirement. And so we got into some of that. I will say, and I'm not going to caveat all of my interviews, this was a bit of a weird setting. I didn't realize what we were getting into. If I could do it again, I think if Dontrell could do it again, we would do it over Zoom, likely just because it would have created a little bit better situation. So I would like to have Dontrell on again before he enrolls in May so that we can maybe have a little bit more, lighthearted, laid back. We were in a tiny room in Langston Hughes High School with like 5 other people just hawked over us during the interview. So I don't think that Dontrell was necessarily the most, comfortable or excitable to be doing an interview, and I totally understand that. But either way, we went 15 solid minutes talking about all sorts of different things. I think that he gets into some great things, and this is a nasty dude. This is a guy that will put people's face in the ground, and I think that he has a chance to be a staple of Georgia's offensive line moving forward. So we're going to get into that interview. Before we do that, I've already recommended Dogs 24/7 subscription. I love to call this out. If you get a full Dogs 24/7 subscription, you also get access to Paramount Plus, which I think is one of the best perks imaginable for any team recruiting site anywhere that you can get. I would also ask, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That is probably where our 2 biggest audiences are coming from. So if you subscribe there, or if you listen on either of those places, please subscribe, follow us on those places. Follow Jordan on social at Jordan Davis Hill. Follow myself on Twitter at Benjamin Wolk, on Instagram at Stay Wolk 247. All right, we're going to go to a quick ad break, and then we're going to come back to an interview with Dontrell Glover. Welcome into the show. 6'3", 320, interior offensive lineman, 4-year starter, Georgia's highest classification of high school football, won a state championship here at Langston Hughes, University of Georgia football signee, Dontrell Glover. Thank you for joining us. I got to ask, since you haven't enrolled yet at Georgia, what are you getting into this spring? Has Coach Searles already gotten you on any kind of workout plan or anything like that?
Yeah, I start working out next week, so I get the workout book, the playbook, and I call nutrients next week too to see what they want me at.
What they got you doing already?
Oh, I ain't doing nothing right now. I'm waiting on the workout plan.
Have you gotten it since you've signed with Georgia? Have you gotten a chance to get up there and spend any time, whether it was Sugar Bowl practices or just hanging out with some of the guys that have enrolled already?
No, but I talked to a couple of the guys almost every day, or they text in the group chat.
Who's your go-to?
Like who are the guys in the class that you're tightest with right now?
Bo Walker, Warren Gaston, Ethan Barbour, Cortez Smith.
For sure. All right, I want to get into the story of how you ended up at Georgia a little bit, and I'm gonna start here. Where were you the evening of January 10th, 2024? You know what date that is?
The day Nick Saban.
The day Nick Saban retired. So for those listening that aren't aware, he was committed to Alabama at the time. I want to just take you back there. Like, where were you, or where did you find out the news that Nick Saban was retiring?
I was at the house. They posted on social media. I saw it, but I was like, I'm still gonna stay at Alabama. Yeah. A few days later, Coach Wolk called. He said they fired him. So I was just like, I'm gonna open my recruitment back up.
What was that? I mean, what was that like for you? I mean, I feel like it was anybody in college football was crazy, but obviously, if you're someone getting personally recruited by Alabama, like, what was that experience like? Just finding that out when everyone else did.
It was crazy. I mean, it was talks about it earlier in the season because Coach Saban felt like he shouldn't have to pay a kid to come play for him when it's the sport he loved. It was just, I had to get it and go with it, but I wanted to stay.
How long was it after you found out the news that Georgia reached out to you?
Probably been the next week. Yeah. I went up in April for spring practice. And that same week I went to the spring game. I just kept going back.
Wasn't it? It was at that spring game that you told the coaches that you wanted to commit to Georgia?
Yeah.
So what happened between decommitting from Alabama, like all of that changing things around, Georgia reaching back out to you? Well, let me start here. When you decommitted from Alabama, remind me, who were the schools that still had a chance for you?
Just Tennessee. They were the only school just recruiting me, calling me every day.
So what was it about Georgia in particular that won out in the end?
Like how many players they just put in the NFL overall. Like I looked at Tennessee, they don't produce that many linemen to go to the NFL. So looking at Georgia having 7 first-round picks, stuff like that.
So when was the moment that you let coaches know that you were going to commit to Georgia?
Well, it was around April. Then my OV came. Then what day was it? June 24th, 2024.
Yeah.
I made it official.
So how long? I know you're not great at keeping secrets because I think you told me like 48 hours after you told the Georgia coaches. Like what went into when you let Georgia coaches know and you officially announced it, like what went into, or what did you need to see before you could make that official?
Really nothing, because like when I was going to the practices, like it just showed me how it's gonna be, and I like stuff like that.
I know we've talked a little bit about Georgia practices. You like the energy, the competitiveness of it. Do you have a specific memory from a Georgia practice, or maybe it was Kirby Smart getting after somebody on the microphone that really stands out to you about what?
They came out sluggish. The coach did board drills. After the board drills, practice, like they started clicking, everything was looking good. So.
I know you're not going to be the only Hughes offensive lineman at Georgia. Bo Hewley's there as well. I know y'all played on the 2021 state championship team here.
21 and 22.
21 and 22 teams. What positions were y'all playing on the offensive line at the time?
He was playing right tackle. I was playing left tackle.
Okay, so I know we'll talk about this a little bit more. Like obviously you've played really all 5 spots here at Hughes, but going back playing with Bo, how much did he play a role in not necessarily like convincing you to go to Georgia, but helping you understand why Georgia might make sense for you as well?
He didn't play a role, but I feel like playing with a teammate again, like from high school, I won a state championship with him, so it wouldn't be that bad just going back and trying to win a couple more with him.
Were there any times throughout the process where you leaned on him or asked him, like, hey, what's your experience has been like at Georgia? And he was able to offer any
probably
advice?
When he first committed. I was a big Georgia fan, so That was like my freshman or sophomore year. I was just asking him about Georgia. Because we played Rome, 4th round of the playoffs my sophomore year. I got offered by Alabama Saturday. Yeah. I think the day before the state championship game, Coach Smart came up and offered me. So.
I know you mentioned that right there. Like, you grew up in a house that had, you know, the Georgia G everywhere. What's it like actually getting to be part of the Georgia football program now?
It's great. My family get to experience more of how it feels to be a Bulldog.
Tell everybody like about your family, whoever it is that's big Georgia fans. Like, how big Georgia fans have they been your whole life?
Yeah, since I was born. Like, all I see is red and black. It's everywhere in the house, red and black. So they big fans. They love it. But me committed, I think it just made them even prouder. Because when I was going to Alabama, they weren't mad, but like the house would be up, the rest of everybody else would be upstairs watching Georgia. We played them the SC championship game. They was upstairs watching. I was downstairs by myself. I was just, every time Alabama did something, I was yelling.
So what was the vibe change for them? Like, when you let them know that it was going to be Georgia, which I'm sure was a few months before you let the world know that it was going to be Georgia.
They didn't even know.
So what was their reaction to you choosing Georgia?
They was happy. I came back a lot. Came back to the home. One of the best teams ever. So they was.
Now, I was asking you about Bo and how, you know, he sort of, you know, laid a path at Hughes, and now you are able to do that for guys behind you as well. Is there anyone in particular here at Hughes that you know, see a bright future for, that you might also be trying to bring to Georgia with you?
I say Carson, Quantavious Wiggins. That's our other running back.
I was gonna ask you about them, just because you know we're blocking for them this season. I know Carson just visited Georgia for a junior day earlier. Like, is there anything in particular about his game that you can let people know? You probably have seen him more than just about anybody has.
Well, early in the season, he wasn't like a downhill runner, but Quantavious Wiggins had got hurt at like the middle of the season. So after that, he started taking over and like start learning the pass, like get downhill, and he could beat you with his speed. So
for sure. All right. I know we talked about the 2021 state championship. Is it too soon to talk about this most recent state championship?
The recent.
Yeah, is it?
No, it's cool.
Well, I was going to ask. Let me ask it this way. So for anyone that is not familiar, it was all-time talent state championship game, like across the board, college football players across both Langston Hughes and Milton's roster. One of the best most compelling first halves of football I've probably ever watched in my life. But I'll ask it this way. Have you spoken with Ethan Barbour and CJ Wiley?
Yeah, I talked to him right after the game. I told him, we got to go do this at Georgia. It's only right.
Well, I mean, what was that like? It's not often that you're seeing a state championship game where there's three guys going to play college ball at the same place. One, I mean, did you have a chance to sort of recognize how iconic that was? But two, I mean, what was it like getting to play against guys? I know that they're on the other side of the ball, so y'all weren't matched up much, but how much were getting a chance to play with them?
It was good, just like seeing them do what they do best, seeing what I do best. Just seeing both teams compete. Like Ethan, how many touchdowns? He had 2.
I think he might have had 2. I know he had the big one early.
Yeah, he had 2 touchdowns. CJ had 1
right before the end of half.
So it was just good showing their skills.
But yeah, I mean, up front, y'all dominated up front that first half as well. I think Carson ended up with three rushing touchdowns during that game.
3 rushing touchdowns, 100. It might have been 200. I don't know.
All-time football game. I know it didn't necessarily finish the way you wanted, but all-time football game. It was a joy to watch as a sports fan. All right, down at Sugar Bowl Media Day, I got a chance to talk with all the assistant coaches, and I wanted to ask them about the guys that they signed. So have you seen this yet? I talked with Coach Strolls about this. All right, so I'll read out the quote for anyone that hasn't seen it yet. But we sort of talked about 2 things. We talked about you as a player, and then we sort of talked a little bit about position fit as well. And so I wanted to start with the position fit side of things. So Coach Strolls' quote was, Dontrell knows that the more things you can do, the more valuable you are. Dontrell understood that. I go watch practice, and he bumps over to center just to prove, hey, coach, I can play center. We've talked about that practice actually before, where he came up and saw you. What were you trying to prove to him at that practice? Because I know it's not something that you had done a ton of at the time, but what did you want to show him at that practice?
That I can be versatile in position. Like I played tackle for 2 years. I played guard for 1. I played tackle for 3 and guard for 1. So just showing I can snap the ball and work and get out of my stance at center. Just show how versatile I am.
Now, I know you've played a bunch of different spots. That's probably still a little bit undecided because a lot of it's going to be based on what you do when you actually get up to Georgia practices. But what do you see as like where you fit in position fit wise, or what is their plan for you in terms of where you fit in?
They want me to play interior, but I know I could play tackle at the college level because I don't want to get some of the best defensive ends in the state. So I want to get Tyler Atkinson last summer, and he's like the number 2 player in the country in 26. So I know I could just go out there and block anybody.
No doubt. And then the other quote that he had was, the thing about Dontrell, he's another finisher. Dontrell, he's got an edge. He's an answerer. I do like that. And I like the way I like to describe it to people is like, you're a nice guy. I know you are. But when you get on the field, man, you're mean. How would you describe your game? Would you agree with Stacey and I on the assessment of your game?
Oh yeah, I agree. I feel like when we're on the field, it's just business. Like I'm trying to do something to help my team, and the other player trying to do something to help his team. But at the end of the day, I'm always gonna dominate.
All right, gonna do a quick rapid fire here. So this is more just like quick hitter things. Want people to get to know about you a little bit more. What was your favorite Georgia game that you ever went to?
Georgia versus Tennessee this year.
Georgia versus Tennessee this year. What was it about it?
They started off sluggish. As the game went on, the defense started playing better. The offense started getting in the end zone.
What was your favorite visit that you ever went on?
Ever, like any school?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be Georgia, just anywhere.
And I'll probably say Florida.
Official visit or a game visit or
unofficial? Like I went down there my 9th and 10th grade year for spring. It was just being around it and seeing the players. Like Florida got a great program
for sure. All right, what's the player that's already on the team that had the biggest impact on you signing with Georgia?
That's already on the team.
Not in the signing, not another recruit, someone that was like already at Georgia, whether it was like a player host.
You could say Bo Hughley. I feel like really the whole line.
All right, player in the recruiting class that played the biggest role in helping you sign with Georgia.
Probably Mason Short.
Mason Short. Okay, so that's interesting. Y'all were both the 2 guys that were committed to Alabama.
Yeah,
is that
Coach
why?
Sarah said Ben should do a 30 for 30. Like what happened?
What happened?
With Alabama. He was just, because on my OV, he was there. His OV was the next week. So, and he was already committed, I think. So it was just him just showing me around and getting me good with the program.
Yeah, I meant to ask about that just because like you and Mason were really the 2 that experienced the whole Nick Saban retiring, and it changed everything up for you. So that's interesting to hear. All right, defensive lineman at Georgia that you're most excited to match up against in practice?
Really all of them. Ready to compete with anybody, no matter the age, the size. We all bleed the same.
Surely there's someone that you want to.
But overall, I say Elijah Griffin.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. All right, what's your pregame hype song?
Probably.
Or artist?
Probably Screwly G. It don't matter what song.
We'll dub a little Screwly G over the top of this when I put it out there. All right, what's the if you who finished number 2 in your recruitment?
Number 2, Tennessee.
Tennessee. What was it about Tennessee?
Like they just stayed in touch no matter what. Everybody thought I was gonna stay at Alabama. They were the only team still calling, checking up on me. So.
For sure. All right, if I asked you to go run a 40-yard dash right now, what you running?
Like a 5. I said like a 5-5.
Okay. See, a lot of offensive linemen, I would do that. I would ask that too, and they would be like, I think I could break 5. I think I could break 5, and they'd be lying. But you at
I
least
run like a 5-5.
All right. Best sport other than football?
Best sport? I like women's college basketball.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Do you have a team you root for?
South Carolina.
South Carolina. How could you not?
Or UCLA.
Who's your favorite athlete of all time?
Favorite athlete? LeBron.
LeBron James?
Yeah.
Who's your favorite football player?
Football player. When I was younger, it was Cam Newton.
Okay.
So,
anyone now?
Right now. If I just had to say a player, probably be Saquon.
Saquon, yeah, can't go wrong with Saquon. Is he gonna win? Is he gonna win in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
All right. Last one. If I ask you to come back on the show, rules are you got to come back on the show. That's not really a question. It's just that cool with you.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Appreciate you, man.
Sure.
When do you enroll?
May 12th.
May 12th. All right. We got a few more months maybe to have him on the show again. But everyone, Dontrell Glover, appreciate you coming on, man.
Sure.
I didn't realize, it didn't occur to me that I had put him on the spot to maybe make a bad Super Bowl prediction, not thinking that I would air that after the Super Bowl. But he nailed it. So good on Dontrell Glover. Eagles win the Super Bowl. Saquon Barkley wins the Super Bowl. Good. I think it's good to get insights into Dontrell just because, I mean, you saw it there. Like Dontrell, let's put it this way. We're going to put his film on here in a second, and Dontrell speaks through his film. All right. Like he is, you throw on those highlights, and I mean, he is someone that just throws his opponents into the dirt. Jordan, what'd you think of Dontrell?
Really enjoyed it. Thought he handled it well. I can't imagine having like 4 or 5 of my fellow classmates watching me do an interview, other than some of the stuff he said, takeaways, character, responsibility, work ethic. That was on the wall in the Langston Hughes ISS room. So, very important lessons being taken there. No, I thought he was really good. Soft-spoken guy. You see that a lot with offensive linemen. I liked kind of getting, sort of his perspective on the Nick Saban thing, because, him to later bring up Mason Short, that's sort of when he was first talking about it. I thought about him and Mason. And, like Stacey Searles said, think about, really in the whole world of college football, all of the ripple effects of Nick Saban leaving, not only from a recruiting standpoint, you had the transfer portal, you had coaches leaving. I mean, it's a tremendous change, and appreciated his honesty. I think that he was pretty clear about some of the other teams recruiting him, but he sees opportunity at Georgia, and I think with good reason. I mean, they've done such a great job over the years sending offensive linemen to the NFL, and he gets to Georgia and gets settled in and grows over these next few years. He very well could be the next one.
No doubt. All right. Do we have those highlights ready to throw up? Yeah, let's toss those up for anybody that's watching on YouTube. And for anybody that's not watching on YouTube, that's just listening along, I can sort of explain what he's done at the high school level. You're going to see here that he has lined up at all 5 offensive line spots, really center being the one that he's probably done the least of. He really just did that as a showcase to Stacey Searles when he was going through his recruitment, and Stacey Searles was up there at a practice. He wanted to showcase that. But this is a guy that was a left tackle for a state championship team that also had Bo Hewley on the roster. And so he's, at 6'2" to 6'3", 320 pounds, like he's not, like, height-wise, he is not built the same way as some other Georgia offensive linemen. But, I mean, you look at his lower body, the strength of his punch, like this is a nasty offensive lineman. It feels like almost every clip you're looking at somebody on the opposing team with their helmet in the ground. Like, he is not afraid to show people that he is bigger, stronger, more physical than they are. And I think you see that in just about every Dontrell Glover clip. And I think that that's why Alabama fell in love with him originally. And I think that's why when he decommits from Alabama, like, again, Georgia at the time that Dontrell was originally getting recruited, like Georgia was signing guys that were 6'8", 6'7", 6'6", like everybody was. And so they zagged a little bit by taking a guy like Dontrell Glover. And I think you have to have a certain edge about you to be a 6'2", 6'3" offensive lineman for Georgia to be going after you the way that they did with Dontrell.
I like just the confidence, even going back to the interview, but I think it shows up in his tape where he's like, yeah, they want me inside, but I can play outside. I know I can play outside. And even going back to him being willing to snap, think about how much Georgia values positional versatility really on the whole roster, but especially offensive line. We talk about guys that, well, they'll probably start inside, but can kick out. You look at a guy from last year, Malachi Tolliver, who I don't think had a lot of history as a center, and he comes in and they train him how to play center. So just makes you more valuable. And again, I think that's a product of Dontrell's confidence in himself, and really interested to see once he gets to Georgia, how he settles in and how he fits in with the program.
And you spilled the beans a little bit about the setting of that interview. Just to make things clear, it was in the ISS room, the in-school suspension room at Langston Hughes. Dontrell Glover was not in school suspension. He's actually already really, for the most part, finished his classwork at Langston Hughes. He's waiting to enroll in May, and it just so happened that because we were doing it at the school and because he's not really in school at this time, we had to do it in that room, which then just made for anybody that watched, it was, it was a little bit of a weird situation to be in an interview room with a bunch of people just staring us down. But shout out to all the people that were in that room. You all kept it quiet, quieter than the school's alarm, which went off like 4 times during the interview. So no, it was great to hear from Dontrell. And like I said, I'll try and have him on again at some point via Zoom before he enrolls.
Are you familiar with who he said his favorite artist was? I'm not going to lie. I did not know who he was.
I didn't. And I also lied and said that we would dub over the top of it in the video with me knowing damn well that I had no idea who Scrooge. I think it was Scroogey G. Oh God. I'm going to get roasted for that one if I missed that name right there, but that's okay.
Chat, do not clip that. Do not clip that.
Yeah. I'm not known for how hip I am. All right, let's get into some segments, Jordan. What do you think?
I'm ready.
All right, so I'm going to be quick with this one today, but we are going to start a new segment when it merits it called From the Junkyard. And for those of you that are listening to us that are not subscribed to Dogs 24/7, for starters, pause this, go subscribe to Dogs 24/7, and then hit play to restart it. But the Junkyard is our message board for all things talking Georgia football, basketball, baseball, recruiting. Someone just texted me while we were on here doing this recording about a thread that Kip has started talking about TV shows and a lot of debates that are going on about that. So just about anything you can find in there. But we love to mix it up. We would love for you to come join and mix it up in there as well. But I do want to bring questions that I get from the Junkyard that I find relevant, and at least bring them up on this show when it merits it. And so I did a Q&A earlier this week, and I got a question from M. Stevens 205 that was asking about wide receiver recruiting. And the question had more nuance to it than this and more questions than this just specifically. But the piece of it that I wanted to pull out was, given what Georgia just brought in with the recent high school recruiting haul, transfer recruiting haul at wide receiver, M. Stevens 205 asks, how many wide receivers do you even see Georgia taking in the class of 2026? And I actually bring this up not so much to answer the question, how many do I think Georgia will sign in 2026? I did answer that in detail in that VIP Q&A. But I wanted to bring this up because I think it's an easy way for even if you're not in the weeds of recruiting to understand the roster management game a little bit better. And it really is not more complicated than to figure out what Georgia is going to bring in. You need to understand what Georgia is going to lose at that position. And so you think Georgia just brought in 5 wide receivers out of high school recruiting, 2 out of the transfer portal, and you think about what they lost from the roster as it was going into last year's season. I mean, they lost Dom Lovett. They lose Arian Smith. They lost Ra Thomas. They were probably expecting to lose Colby Young, which probably played a part in some of the numbers as well, and that didn't end up happening. But I think when you look at this upcoming season, it's like, who is it fair to expect Georgia to not have next year that they do have this year? And so, they've got Colby Young, who we think is going to be back, that he has a year of eligibility left. You had Noah Thomas that you just took out of the transfer portal. He's got a year of eligibility left. Dylan Bell is someone that flirted with the NFL possibility this year. It would not surprise me at all if he went that route at the end of next year. I think you can always safely put in like a transfer or two. I'm not saying anyone in particular. I just think it's a safe bet that at that position group, given the depth, given not everybody's going to be able to getting the reps that they want, it is a position group where guys know that there's going to be opportunities at other schools. Like I would think that there would be, 1 to 2 wide receivers that would probably transfer out. So I'm right now looking at about 4 signees that Georgia will have at receiver. What the separation is between high school and transfer, I think that still is a little bit to be determined. I mean, again, if you're losing Colby Young and Noah Thomas, you would assume a big body transfer wide receiver who has a year of eligibility left would be a reasonable expectation. And then I would think the rest of it would probably come from the high school ranks. That is not a set in stone. Georgia is taking this number or that number. In fact, that number fluctuates throughout the course of a recruiting cycle based on how your roster that you currently have is performing, what's happening, whether they're leaving, like all those types of things are going to play into effect. But I did think it was a great question from M. Stevens 205, and I think it was an opportunity to showcase like how these position coaches are thinking in terms of what their numbers are going to look like. If you have questions moving forward, as always, I do Q&As on the Junkyard. Jordan does Q&As on the Junkyard. Kip does Q&As on the Junkyard. You're welcome to start your own thread on the Junkyard where you ask us questions specifically. Just since we've been recording this, Jordan had me go answer a question asking about Derek Cooper and running back recruiting on the board since we've been on the show. So these are the types of things that are going on all day long. You can absolutely reach us there. As you know, you can reach us, on DM on social media as well. But we also wanted to set up an email for this show or just anything really that you might want to ask us. But the email is staywolk247@gmail.com. That's staywolk247@gmail.com. I want you all to reach out. Really whatever you want. I know this is a risky business to just say, send us whatever you want via email, but I think that this email will be a catch-all for us to be able to answer questions on here, which could be part of this From the Junkyard segment, even though technically it won't be from the Junkyard. Against my better judgment, potentially, if you want to send us voice memos, voicemails, video recordings of you talking about Georgia football, asking us questions, giving your takes on things. I am not at the point, anybody who's been in our comment section on YouTube is probably familiar with the Munguses. I don't necessarily know that I want to give open reign for the Munguses to just have a time slot on our show. But in the event that you send us something that we find compelling or interesting, I will always ask permission before we do it, but it's something that might find its way onto the show. So don't be shy. Reach out to staywolk247@gmail.com. I will also say, I have called this out in the past, if you rate us on Apple Podcast or Spotify and you give us a 5-star rating and you leave a review, we will read that review. But also if you want a screenshot that you gave us a 5-star review, we will call you out for giving us that 5-star review as well. Send us a screenshot to that email letting us know that you have given us that review, and we'll give you that shout out as well.
One thing I just wanted to say, Ben hit on this. The easiest and fastest way to get us to answer your questions will be over at Dogs 24/7, which is just another reason to subscribe. You can send us the questions here, but we've been recording these maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. If you get on the Junkyard board, if you're on there asking questions, I can promise you we will provide those answers a little bit quicker. But we want to do it here on the show as well. I think the email is going to be really helpful. I hope folks take advantage of it.
And if you're listening to this and you're already a Dogs 24/7 subscriber, as always, you can start threads, you can tag us, you can ask questions. I did have someone this week after that article about the Classic City Collective and the athletic department changes. They had some very good questions that they had about just all of it. And some folks would rather do it via DM than in an open public forum. You do have access to DM us on Dogs 24/7 as well. And like Jordan said, anything that you DM me on Dogs 24/7 or tag me or create a thread, like I'm going to be getting to that way sooner than anything that's happening on social media or via email. But definitely wanted to call out staywolk247@gmail.com. All right, Jordan, I'm going to turn this one over to you to start. Arrow pointing up. I'm going to keep my side of it brief just because I know we've got a couple other things that we want to get to, but whose arrow is pointing up?
So I got two of them, and we are going to start with Georgia baseball, off to a 4-1 start. And I want to shout out Brian Curley. I don't know if you saw any of this.
Working practice. 0-2, a beauty of a bender. Pseudo's down looking, and Georgia scores 6 unanswered.
That's
Brian
sick behavior from him, by the way.
Just for those listening, and I'm so glad you were not in a position where you had to watch this. The closer, Brian Curley, kind of how would you even describe that?
It was like Sting sticking his tongue out and just, it was almost like he blacked out for a second, but it was awesome. It was awesome. For those that weren't watching that clip or haven't seen the clip, he basically sticks his tongue out, stares at the guy at second base, shakes his head in a taunting form, and then just throws strike 3 to close out the game, and then launches his glove into the air.
It was fantastic. That was a chippy little game. I guess we didn't really consider, look, Georgia, Kennesaw State, there's probably guys who know each other. I would imagine there's probably some Kennesaw State guys that are like, hey, Georgia never recruited me. Let's go, put it in their face and beat them. And Georgia had to come back. And, I think I like the swagger of this Georgia team to this point. I was impressed.
No, I agree. I've said it before, but Olivia Sayers' baseball coverage has been fantastic for us already. I think the baseball season is going to be pretty fun. And, you lose a game to UNC Wilmington, underrated baseball program. Also would be a really fun college to just go to in general right there on the beach in Wilmington. If I had been a college baseball player, or if I was capable enough to have been a college baseball player, UNC Wilmington definitely would have been on my short list.
Second arrow pointing up, Saturday Night Live. I don't know, Ben, if you're a big an
I didn't catch this, but I saw a lot of conversation around it.
Yes, the 50th anniversary show, a 3-hour show. I was a little bit late to it because of all the wedding stuff I mentioned at the top, but got a chance to sit down and watch it. Thought it was really funny. Ben, give me maybe one or two SNL folks that you really enjoy, guys or gals on the show that are your favorites.
Oh, man. I'm more of an old school SNL guy. So, it's probably a lazy pick, but I feel like when I think SNL, I think Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell would be on there for me. I've always loved Norm Macdonald. He was one of my favorite stand-ups, so love Norm. Got to shout out Eddie Murphy. Because anything Eddie's ever done is just fantastic. And yeah, Will Ferrell. What I love about Will is you kind of could write out some of those sketches, just like the idea, that's stupid, but Will does it, and it's just, it's hilarious. And he was a big part of that 50th anniversary, and he was as funny as ever.
Yeah, I'll probably need to go check out. I've seen some clips from it. Anytime SNL is doing something, there's always some kind of conversation online about it. So I need to go check that out. But I haven't stayed up with my SNL the way that I probably should.
A shout out to Bill Hader, who was not there, but love Bill Hader as well.
No doubt. All right, my arrow pointing up is Georgia Legacies, and that's going to take me to a couple of different places. So we talked about the Under Armour Atlanta camp. There were 2 guys in the 2027 class, so they're about to be rising juniors that are wildly talented football players. I know it sounds crazy for us to be talking about 2027s already, but that's just where we are. Number 3 player in the 24/7 sports recruiting rankings, DJ Jacobs, David Jacobs Jr. He's the son of David Jacobs Sr., who was a defensive lineman for Georgia from 1999 to 2002. DJ Jacobs is watching him and LaDainian Guyton as edge rushers in the state of Georgia in the 2027 class. It's going to be fascinating to watch. They're both, I think, a very high probability that they end up, or that one of the 2 of them or both of them end up at Georgia. But DJ Jacobs, Georgia Legacy. Andrew Beard from Prince Avenue Christian. Who also now head coach John Richt, the son of Mark Richt. But Andrew Beard is the nephew of former Georgia running back Garrison Hurst. Andrew could probably play running back. He could probably play defensive back at the next level. DJ Jacobs, Andrew Beard, 2 guys, Georgia legacies that I think have a very high chance of ending up at Georgia in the future. And then I'll say this one as well. I'm not revealing the news here. This is going to be a tease for anyone that gets annoyed by teases. This is going to annoy you. There is a Georgia legacy, or the son of a former Georgia football player, legend, that I think there is a chance that he ends up being part of Georgia's 2025 recruiting class. I'm not saying that it's definitive. And I keep in mind, I said 2025 recruiting class, meaning the group that's already signed and is enrolled. Subscribe to Dogs 24/7, and I think that there will be news tidbits on that at some point in the future. I'm not putting a timeline on that, but just know the era of the sons and the nephews of and the cousins of former Georgia football players being Georgia football players themselves. Like we have arrived in this era.
We're old, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm telling you. All right, my favorite segment, I think probably the best feedback that we've gotten from the segments up to this point. It is Predict to Commit. Just as a quick refresher, where Jordan and I are going through every episode and we are predicting 1, sometimes 2. We'll see what it's going to be today. Guys that we think are going to commit to Georgia at some point during the recruiting cycle. As a reminder, Jordan has Derek Cooper, Tyler Atkinson. And if you're watching on YouTube, he has a graphic pulled up on this as well. He has Derek Cooper, Tyler Atkinson, Carter Lucky, and Mark Bowman. Did I get your side of things correct?
You are correct.
And then on my side, it is Graham Houston, Zach Fort, Jay Lamar, and Desmond Green. Jordan, I was gonna go first, but I'm actually gonna let you go first. I'm feeling generous today. Who you got?
No, you go first. That'll help me to get the graphics up. And I kind of want the feeling of being the second guy. I want to see if I have to adjust on the fly. So it's all you, buddy.
Okay, so I am going to take a little bit of a leap of faith on this one. This is going to be my every other pick, Graham Houston, Zach Fort, Jay Lamar, Desmond Green. None of them are like, actually, you know what? I'm changing my mind on the fly. I brought it up earlier in the show. I brought up Jay Lamar and another player that is sort of mentioning Georgia as a top target, or as their top school right now. At safety, I am taking my Predict to Commit, Buford defensive back, Tyreek Green. I wasn't going to take him originally, but now that I think about it, I think that there's a really high chance that he ends up there. I was actually when Tyreek Green actually started his high school career at Kell High School, where Georgia's also recruiting some other top players right now. And when he was at Kell, I was actually out at a spring practice at Kell that Travaris Robinson was also at. And there were a lot of good players out there at Kell, but Travaris Robinson was hawking Tyreek Green during this. He had a video camera out recording every little last thing that he did. I know that they've really got a strong relationship. He visited for a junior day. Like I mentioned, he already told me after that UA Atlanta camp that Georgia has separated themselves from the pack as one of his top schools. That's not to say that Georgia's guaranteed to get him, but I'm feeling pretty good about where Georgia stands right now. And so I'm adding Tyreek Green to my list.
I like it.
Tyreek Boogie Green, by the way. Boogie is his nickname.
Please, let's get more of that. Let's get more where that came from. I'll take the screen down real quick. I thought you were going to go with someone else, and I'm going to save that one, but I will go with another defensive back, and I'm going to go with Houston County's Jordan Smith. I'm going to go with him. I think he's a guy that has I think he's already got his official visit scheduled.
May 30th to June 1st.
So I think he's a guy that you pay attention to those visits. You pay attention to some of those in-state guys, especially. It feels like these last couple of years, the state of Georgia has really been productive and had a lot of quality recruits. We've talked a good bit. I feel like the two positions, Ben, and sort of position groups that we've talked a lot about in 2026 has been running back and the secondary defensive back. So I think that Georgia's going to go hard after some of these guys. I really like the possibility here with Jordan Smith, and I've got him as my next Predict to Commit.
Well, you already know I was going to do this, Jordan. You knew anytime that I'm teasing whether we're going to take one or two, that I just can't help myself. I'm going to want to take two. And it sounded like we were both a little conflicted on who we might take with our first pick. So let's do it. Let's predict 2 commits today. I am going to let you go first this time. I'm not going to let you talk me out of it.
All right. This was the one I was kind of going back and forth on. And when you started this segment and we're saying, yeah, this was a guy that I was talking about a little earlier, I was like, oh, he's getting this guy like that. I should have interrupted. Said, no, I changed my mind. This is who I'm going with. I'm going to go with Jared Smith.
Ooh, I like that pick too.
Jared Smith, interior offensive lineman that you talked about earlier in the show. Again, looking at these offensive linemen, looking at the possibilities and the guys that Georgia's going hard after. I kind of like, when in doubt, I think back to that junior day and who was getting some time with Kirby Smart, who was there for that basketball game. Jared Smith was one of those guys. He's a really impressive guy. And I think that, it's not going to be easy. Some of these you're like, you kind of get a sense like, all right, I feel really good about this pick. No, by no means is this one done, but I really like Jared Smith, and he's going to be my next predicted commit.
To that point, we almost need to put a date next to when we're making these, because like predicting a commit on February 20th compared to predicting a commit when we're doing a show on like June 25th is going to be completely different, because there's going to be so much more clarity later on in the year once they've gotten through spring visits and official visits and things like this. So right now, I mean, the fact that we're doing 2 predicted commits an episode, back-to-back episodes, like we're putting our neck out there a little bit. I do think Miami's going to give Georgia a run for Jared Smith, but I like that pick a lot.
I don't want to call us brave, but Ben, like, I mean, what we're doing here with this show, you're just not seeing it anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly right. Like I'll say it. We're brave. We're brave. And you know what? You want to know how brave I am, Jordan? I'm about to do something. I told myself, like, when you picked Derek Cooper and Tyler Atkinson, I was like, all right, and I think both those are great picks. I think there's a great chance that either or both of those guys end up in Georgia's class. Make no mistake about that. But I thought, man, Jordan is really shooting for the stars with these first couple picks. Like, those are guys that are going to be 5 stars, number 1 linebacker, one top 5, I think 5 athlete in the country with Derek Cooper. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try and take a more measured approach. I'm not going to take any crazy chances. I'll get to the 5 stars when we get there. And I just decided, screw it. I'm going to do it. And I know that if there is one quarterback notwithstanding, if there was one player in this class that Georgia could just go out and say, NIL aside, where they want to go to school aside, you can have one football player, who would that football player be? The answer for me is 5-star offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell. This is going to be a wildly, wildly, wildly competitive recruitment. Oregon's involved. Miami's involved. He's from Missouri, and Missouri's going to be involved. Michigan's going to be involved. You don't really have to go further than looking at those schools that I just listed, the top 6 that he's released. I think Ohio State was in there as well, to know that this guy is going to be compensated very, very well for his skill set and his recruitment. I mean, you are looking at the best of the best when it comes to NIL operations in college football right now, are the ones that are in his top 6. You throw on top of that, it is all of the best offensive lines in America. Typically speaking, I know Georgia fans are going to push back on that given what they just witnessed last year. Flash in the pan, Georgia offensive lines, Michigan, Ohio State, Miami, Oregon, like, these are the best offensive lines across college football. These are the teams that are in the top 5, top 6 for Jackson Cantwell. Kirby Smart went out to see him in Missouri. Anytime that Kirby's going to make that far of a trip to go see a guy during the window, something to think about. I know last year when the contact period started, the very first morning that coaches could be out somewhere, that's where Stacey Searles was. He went to go see a 2026 recruit, not a 2025 recruit at the time. I know that Jackson has told me in the past that Stacey Searles was the very first coach that went out to see him during that contact window, and that is not a coincidence. Georgia knew exactly what it was doing when it was doing that. He will have an official visit scheduled to Georgia, though I don't have the exact date on that yet. I am confident in saying that Georgia will earn an official visit. There are some interesting family ties there. His family, both of his parents were Olympic throwers, and Jackson Cantwell in his own right is, along with being arguably the best offensive lineman in the country, is also one of the best shot putters and discus throwers in the country. He'll be competing for Nike national events and those types of things. I know he set a 40-year Kansas relays record last year in either the shot put or the discus. I can't remember. So he is really like that when it comes to shot put and discus. His parents both competed in the Olympics, and they are close friends with a guy named Reese Hoffa, who is a University of Georgia shot putter, discus thrower, who has trained a lot of people in the Georgia area. I think he was even on the track and field coaching staff at one point, potentially, but he lives in the Athens area. And when the Cantwells come on visits to Georgia, they often stay multiple days because they'll stay at Reese Hoffa's house. And so there are serious Georgia connections there. Georgia wants this guy really, really badly. If I were to point to what are my red flags with Georgia landing Jackson Cantwell, it's one, for lack of a better term, it's going to be a big money recruitment because he's at a position where it requires it and he's just that good. And then two, because of the track and field side of things, I think that Oregon, which is a school that is really high on his list, has a little bit of an advantage. Like I know that I was just talking with Jackson last week and he sent me his full track and field schedule, and like the national event, like June 19th to June 22nd is in Eugene, Oregon, on Oregon's campus. It would not surprise me at all if his official visit to Oregon is shaped around that visit as well. I don't know that specifically, but all that to say, like he's going to get access to Oregon just through some of his track and field related things. So I think that does give a little bit of a built-in advantage to Oregon, but I'm taking my first 5-star leap of faith, Jackson Cantwell to Georgia.
Sometimes you got to risk it. And I think to your point, I mean, Georgia's going to be in the thick of it. There's a long way to go in this one. Jackson's a guy I thought about, just wouldn't pull the trigger, but we talked about brave earlier. Ben, you're braver than me, and I like your chances there.
Well, what it came down to, and that's why I almost took him with my first pick over Tyreek Green, is I'm from Missouri. I was born just outside of Springfield, Missouri, and I would have gone to Nixa High School, which is the high school that he goes to in Southwest Missouri. I would not have been able to live with myself if I was looking at a graphic that said Jackson Cantwell, Nixa, Missouri, and it was on Jordan's side, not Ben's side. And then he ends up signing with Georgia or committing to Georgia. I couldn't have lived with it being on your side of the graphic. So if I'm wrong, I'll take that hit, but I could not have been in a world where you were right and had the guy from Nixa High School that's the 5-star offensive lineman.
Well, the nice thing, if that would have happened, is I wouldn't have, bullied you. I wouldn't have held that over your head at all.
No, definitely not. All right. Thank you again. Thank you, obviously, Jordan, for being part of this show. I think this was another great episode. Thank you to Dontrell Glover for joining the show for that interview. I will say we'll have another episode next week. I'm expecting we're trying to get on more of a weekly cadence, but like I said, the interviews, like I want you to be able to have interviews, and I want these episodes to be worth your while. And so I think having that part of it is good too. I will say for the next episode, we will have another Georgia signee, so 2025 signee who is not yet enrolled. So make sure you tune in for that. Great interview. Really fascinating story, fascinating player. So definitely tune in for our next episode of the Stay Wolk UGA Recruiting Show. As always, subscribe to Dogs 24/7, like and subscribe on the Dogs 24/7 YouTube channel. Leave us a review. Let us know you left a review at staywolk247@gmail.com. We really appreciate everyone. And until next time, I'm your host, Ben Wolk. I'm here with Jordan Hill, and we will catch you